Hello, everyone, and welcome to Wrestling the Territories podcast. This is podcast number two. So, what I'm going to do tonight, I want to look at some of the big storylines of 1983, cover some of them, and then over time, I'll go through and I will do them individually, deep dive into them. But in 1983, it was a very unique year because that's the first year of Starcade. So, all these storylines from the beginning of 83 all the way through are really good. And the fans are really into it. This is a very big year for the Mid Atlantic Territory. So let's start out by talking about one of the bigger ones, talking about Greg Hammer Valentine and Roddy Piper. So what happened there was Roddy Piper challenged Greg Valentine for the U.S. title. As it goes through, a lot of things go on between them, a lot of jawing, a lot of talking. They end up having a match where Roddy Piper ends up winning the U.S. title. Then a few weeks later, he loses it back to Greg Valentine, has a ruptured ear in the process, plus he's a new dad. So he's out with his family for a bit. And in this process, Greg the Hammer Valentine is just so happy, that Roddy Piper's gone and pretty excited about that and don't have to worry about Roddy Piper. He put him out, right? During an interview process with Bob Caudle, Greg the Hammer Valentine finds out that Wahoo McDaniels is coming back into town. And Wahoo is somebody who Greg the Hammer Valentine broke his leg some few years back, and not very happy with that. But the storyline continues on with Roddy Piper in an interview saying he may never return. This may be the worst thing ever. He may never return to professional wrestling again, but he does. And it's later on that they end up in the famous dog collar match that a lot of people have talked about, a lot of people have watched and enjoyed. And if you've never seen it, please go check it out. If you've got the Peacock Network on the WWE, you can go over and check it out in Starrcade 83. Probably can find it on YouTube as well. And look up every match you can between Roddy Piper and Greg the Hammer Valentine and just see what you can find. All the matches are good. I think you guys will really, really enjoy it. Okay, so as we continue on, we want to talk about a big storyline between Jay Youngblood, Ricky Steamboat versus Sergeant Slaughter and Don Cornoodle. Now, Sergeant Slaughter and Don Cornoodle, two of the most hated men in the Mid Atlantic area. Nobody likes them. And so they end up in this big battle with Ricky Steamboat and Jay Youngblood. And it goes back and forth, a lot of, again, jawing back and forth, so to speak. But they end up challenging them inside a steel cage, and this happens in Greensboro. And I believe, if I remember hearing correctly in the interview, Jay Youngblood's like 16,000 people witnessed it. So the arena plus an overflow witnessed this, and this was a huge night. So whoever was on that card with them that night, they probably had a pretty good payday for sure. But the match was really good. If you've never seen that, please go back and check it out. Like I say, I'll deep dive into this battle between these two teams later on. But what happens is it happens early in the year. They lose, so Sergeant Slaughter and Dr. Noodle loses the tag team titles to Steamboat and Youngblood, challenges them back, want to be another cage match, and then it's not too long after that Sergeant Slaughter is gone. You don't see him no more. He's left the territory. Don Noodle's still there. Eventually, he ends up teaming with Ivan Koloff and becoming a tag team champion again. But so through this process of needing a new heel team, Jack and Jerry Briscoe's been there for a bit and pretty popular. The fans really like them. And so they challenged Steamboat and Youngblood to a match on Mid Atlantic Wrestling. You can go see that on the network on the territories. And the match is pretty good. You have Jerry Briscoe putting Ricky Steamboat in a figure four. Jack accidentally falls on Ricky Steamboat's legs during the figure four. Claims it was an accident, didn't mean to do it. Uh, Steamboat and Youngblood don't completely agree with that, but they're like, "Oh, okay, okay. If you're saying it's an accident, it's an accident." So they have another match, and pretty much the same thing happens again. Uh, Jerry Briscoe's got him in a figure four. Jack jumps on and try to break the leg. What happens is the complete heel turn is when they're confronted by Boogie Woogie Man, Jimmy Valiant, and others about, you're saying it's an accident, but it looks intentional, right? So they turn on these guys. And so Private Nelson's one that actually comes out who used to be friends with Sergeant Slaughter and Don Cornoodle. He comes out and confronts him first, and asks, "Come on, Jack, won't you get in the ring with me? Come on, let's me and you get in a fight." So they get in the ring and they end up putting him in a leg lock, trying to break his leg. Boogie Woogie Man comes out, and others, Johnny Weaver. They power slam Jimmy Valiant and turn completely heel at that point. Eventually, they go against Steamboat and Youngblood again later on down the road and take the tag team titles from Steamboat and Youngblood, where Steamboat Youngblood recover those belts at Starrcade '83. But the storyline, like I say, I'll break all these down later on. It's interesting to see how it starts with Slaughter and Cornoodle, and then goes to the Briscoes. And I tell you, the battles are really good in those matchups for sure. And like I say, if you can find those, go look for them. If you have the Peacock Network, you gotta go check those out. Good matches. Okay, so the biggest storyline of '83 is Ric Flair and Hardy Race and the battle for the world heavyweight title. And earlier in the year, Ric Flair is the champion. He has a squabble with Greg Valentine and others, and then eventually loses the title to Hardy Race. And Hardy Race is like, "Look, I'm not going to give him another title shot. I don't want to deal with it, and I don't want to do it in North Carolina, which is where Flair's home is in Charlotte." So he makes his home in Charlotte. So Greensboro is where they're going to have Starrcade. And Hardy Race wants nothing to do with this whole situation. He actually puts a bounty on Ric Flair and says if anybody can take him out, I think it's like $10,000 bounty. Anybody can take him out, uh, they'll get this bounty. So Ric Flair's good friend Bob Orton turns on Rick and helps Dick Slater break Ric Flair's neck. Puts Flair out for a while. Again, another one of those storylines where I don't think I'll come back. It's like Roddy Piper said he didn't think he'd come back. So Flair didn't think he would come back. He does come back, and it's really cool to see it. It's actually in a gymnasium. I forget exactly where it's at, but it's in a gymnasium. You can kind of see how all this is playing out, but from the stages and all that stuff, it's pretty cool. And so Flair goes after Orton and Dick Slater with a ball bat, says he's coming back and challenges Hardy Race for the belt at Starrcade, where he does win it. So it's a real unique storyline to go back and look. If you want to go back, please go back and watch where Flair comes back with a ball bat. You can kind of see I think it's like a gymnasium somewhere. Nothing like what we were used to seeing today in these big sports arenas and whatnot. Because back in '83, at the beginning of '83, and until probably about, I guess, about halfway through the year, they were in a studio, a small little studio. And then they start branching out into these, auditoriums and gymnasiums and stuff like this. And you can see that transpire, which is really cool to see it go from a small little state or a small little studio to these, arenas and stuff. I like here in Asheville, North Carolina, the Civic Center. So they start filming, and it looks a lot better. Although you will see several times where there's not a big crowd. The crowds are not very big. There's not a lot of people there sometimes, and but it's an interesting little change from the studio to that. So that's another big thing that happens in '83. And so they're moving right along. Dusty Rhodes is coming along at this point in time, and '83 Starrcade starts the whole thing, right? And just a deep dive into all these storylines I will be doing over time. You'll eventually in that Starrcade you have like Kabuki versus Jimmy Valiant under a mask. I mean, it's just really cool to see all these stories come along. So I will deep dive into Starrcade eventually as well. But what I want to do is go back and we'll start with maybe Greg Valentine and Roddy Piper at some point. I also have some other storylines I want to cover and talk about. The Ron Garvin getting burned by Jim Cornette's a pretty big story. It starts Ron Garvin's journey to the world title that doesn't end as good as it should had. If you've never seen or never heard of that, you'll see what I mean when I get involved with that. But '83 had a good year. '83 had a lot of stuff going on, and all these storylines from Valentine and Piper to Youngblood and Steamboat's run as tag champions, and the two matchups they had that are real big, and also Flair and Harley Race. All this is just a big, huge year for the Mid Atlantic area. And when I start covering, like I say, we'll get into it and see what happens and see how it transpired from beginning to end. I don't think I'll be able to put any videos up, for us to look at. But what I can do is probably put a picture up with some audio. We'll see if we can do that, and we won't get in trouble. I don't think we will, but I can put some pictures up with some audio, and we'll maybe listen to the interviews that go along with it, and maybe some highlights and matches we'll listen to that will help us break down these stories. And what's important about professional wrestling that's kind of been lost over the last few years, but it's starting to come back slowly, especially in the WWE, is like what they call the long term storytelling. And it does make a huge difference if you let storylines play out as long as they can, barring any real injuries. And kind of like the Cody Rhodes journey to his championship. All that stuff is big, and it will help the viewer stay intact and watch and want to come back for more. And back in the day, they had to do that because he didn't have these big contracts they sign and stuff. So what they had to really do is put as many butts in the seats they possibly can to make money each and every time they would go out and wrestle. So the long term storytelling makes a huge difference in how your wrestling promotion goes. I see a lot of people complaining about AEW all the time, and they have good matches. Don't get me wrong. And what little bit I've been able to watch of them, the long term storytelling. I think people are really wanting to see more of that, and maybe more interviews, more heated stuff. And I think AEW is starting to work on that a little bit. What I've been able to watch and seeing the connection between NXT and TNA is really really cool because you never know who's going to show up where, when, and how. And it's good to see the WWE branching out. That's really a cool thing. The NWA is starting to come back. Billy Corgan's got that thing going, and they're on the CW app, so go check them out as well. And I think the thing with the NWA is it's one of those where they'll have to do that as well, that long term storytelling. And I think what Corrigan's doing and what I'm seeing is he's signing people to his long term contracts. So once he can get that taken care of, then you can start having these good matches and storylines that goes along with it. Because if you notice in the past with the NWA, they had Eli Drake, who's LA Knight now, and they had a lot of good stars. And they just lost them, during the pandemic and all that. Nick Aldis and others, and so they're trying to get that back. So I think the NWA is going to do good with the territory returns again. Going back to the territories and having all these different places. I think Chicago and Ohio. I want to say Florida, I believe. But anyway, they're making headway and really going in a good direction, I think. And I think once Corrigan and the NWA gets people, locked down some contracts and has quite a few people locked down, then you can start, having some good stories that, each week that can keep people there. And that's what you want to do. You want to keep people watching week after week and, that make them want to come back, right? I mean, if you're not telling good stories, nobody's going to watch it, right? So a good storytelling, much like they had back in the day. I mean, long term, look at Ric Flair, the Horseman, and Dusty Rhodes, and all the interchanging parts between the Horseman members and Dusty's buddies. Sometimes you had the Road Warriors, sometimes you had the Rock and Roll Express, sometimes you had Magnum, sometimes Nikki. So all those changing parts over time were the things that made the NWA so popular and so good, and people to enjoy it. So what they want is for you to stay tuned, right? So that's what the whole stay tuned till next week. It's like if you're not telling the good stories, people are not going to come back and watch. So for any wrestling organization, and this is from a fan perspective only, I want to be able to go back each week and see what's going to happen next. And we all love that. We all miss that. And if you never watched any of the 80s wrestling, Mid Atlantic, World Class, any of those, go back and watch them and see the difference because back then they really had to put butts in the seat in order to make a living. And so the stories had to be good. I mean, uh, you like I said earlier, Jim Cornette burning Ronnie Garvin's face. You had Dusty Rhodes get his arm broke by the Horseman, got his leg broken. That's what got the Horseman started. up in that cage match. So I mean, all these different things is what keeps people coming back. So if they're willing to do it and they do it right, you'll have a successful organization because those fans are going to love to watch it. Until next time, God bless. See you soon.